Welcome back to another weekly space rundown, and in a nice change of pace from last Monday, we actually had some orbital launches last week. 62 Starlink satellites made it to space across 3 SpaceX Falcon 9 launches, including the first launch of Starlink Group 9. Rocket Lab launched the first of 5 dedicated launches for an Internet of Things satellite constellation on Electron's 50th flight. Long March 2C placed 2 satellites in orbit. SpaceX sent a Luxembourgish communication satellite to Geosynchronous orbit. Boeing faced more problems with the stuck Starliner spacecraft. And, of course, there was lots of progress with SpaceX's Starship development. I mean, what the heck's up with that? Let's kick things off. I think the biggest bit of Starship development news to drop last week was the long-awaited release of Tim Dodd's latest Elon Musk Starbase tour. If you've not seen it yet, then do check it out in the description. It's over an hour long, and we got some great never-before-seen views of Starbase. I can't possibly cover the whole thing here. One highlight for me, though, was seeing Elon discuss the new Star Factory building, which will enable serialized production of Starship. Long term, he wants production rates of 1,000 ships per year, though the current factory building will likely only be capable of about 100 per year, which is still a pretty insane output level. That sounds pretty out of reach, but Elon did remind us that SpaceX are currently on pace to produce around 200 Falcon 9 second stages this year alone, so they are no strangers to mass production of rockets. Speaking of mass production, we also got a great view at a huge fleet of produced Raptor 2 engines. Unfortunately, there's no Raptor 3 to be seen here, but that is coming soon. What's really crazy is just the rate at which SpaceX are able to produce these engines, and what's crazier is that Elon later elaborated that SpaceX could build a lot more if they wanted to, but the next version of Raptor is really the one to scale up production, testing of which should begin at McGregor within a week or so. Of course, about a month ago, we saw a Raptor and ground support equipment RUD at the McGregor tripod test stand, but last week we did see this return to action, so just in time for the beginning of Raptor 3 tests. Elon also elaborated on Raptor 3 having regenerative cooling and secondary flow paths made integral to the whole engine, therefore not requiring a heat shield, the removal of which also removes the need for over 10 tons of fire suppression behind the engine heat shield, since any leaking gas will just enter the already superheated plasma around the engines, making any leaks irrelevant. Oh, and Raptor 3 will also have higher thrust and specific impulse over Raptor 1 and 2. The video was particularly fun to watch because it was filmed one day before Flight 4, and so some of the comments made by Elon in the video, with the hindsight of how Flight 4 went, were pretty humorous, particularly when Elon discussed the hinge gap between the ship fuselage and the control flap body.
So, one of the key questions is, does that seal work?
Right.
We think it'll work, but it may not work.
As we know, it didn't quite work, but in fairness, the ship did survive, and the flaps were still able to actuate for that final landing burn. As we know, SpaceX are already making big changes to the vehicles for Flight 5. We obviously know that Ship 30 is having its entire heat shield replaced, for example, but how many other changes are happening that we aren't so aware of? Well, Elon also highlighted just how much the data from flight tests influences current in-production vehicles, with the number of hardware changes alone racking up into the thousands. So it's pretty crazy that we're still optimistic for a launch date in late July or early August for Flight 5. I can't imagine any other space company having such fast turnaround times for changes. We also got some great views inside the Star Factory building, but honestly guys, just watch the video. I don't want to spoil any more of it here, and trust me, I barely scratched the surface of all the juicy information that it contains. Flight 5 won't be the next test we see at the launchpad. Last week we saw test tank B 14.2 heading to the launchpad after departing the Macy's test site. It was then lifted onto the launchpad itself by crane, old school style, since it's probably too short for the chopsticks to lift from the ground. Why is it here? Well, there are 3 road closures scheduled for this week, starting from tomorrow, and it's speculated that this booster is going to be filled with some kind of mass simulator liquid to make it weigh the same amount as a Super Heavy coming in to land, and then the chopsticks will lift it and, move around and stuff to make sure they can handle the mass of a booster catch for real, which is still expected to happen as early as Flight 5. Ryan Hansen, as always, produced some incredible renders of what the test might end up looking like. The construction of the second launch pad and tower continues at Warp 9 speed. SpaceX are busily assembling a gigantic CC-8800-1 crane, which will be used to assemble the gigantic catch and launch tower. Remember that Franken crane beast from a few years ago? It's going to be cool seeing another massive crane operating at the site. We also saw the arrival of more ground support equipment. Boca Chica Gal heroically braved a rather torrential rain downpour to bring us this footage of the arrival of a new horizontal tank, and if you thought that these things were small, then the humans and trucks for scale hopefully paint a good picture of just how big these things are, even if they are somewhat dwarfed by the now defunct vertical tanks. Now, SpaceX aren't letting Starship development slow the crazy cadence of Falcon 9's launches. We saw 4 launches last week alone, 3 of which were Starlink missions, launching on Wednesday, Sunday, and earlier today. In total, SpaceX placed 62 more V2 satellites to orbit, including more with direct-to-cell capability, and also the first 40 Starlink satellites for Starlink Group 9. All 3 launches were a success, from launch to drone ship landing. We also saw a Falcon 9 carry the Astra 1P communication satellite to geosynchronous orbit. This was on Thursday, launching from Cape Canaveral Launch Complex 40. Astra 1P is operated by SES, a Luxembourgish telecommunication provider who supply video and data connectivity worldwide to a host of broadcasters, institutions, private companies, and governments. After a successful flight, Falcon 9's first stage then made a successful drone ship landing, shortly following stage separation. Rocket Lab launched their 50th Electron rocket last Thursday. This was their mission titled No Time to Lose, and the first of 5 dedicated launches of 5 Internet of Things satellites for Kinéis, a French satellite operator. When completed, the constellation will consist of 25 nanosatellites, forming the first European constellation dedicated to the Internet of Things with global coverage. And Rocket Lab could celebrate their 50th Electron launch as a success, with all 5 satellites successfully reaching their low Earth orbit destinations. China had a successful launch of their old reliable Long March 2C last Saturday, which placed 2 scientific payloads into low Earth orbit on behalf of the China National Space Administration. One is a Chinese X-ray astronomy satellite, and the other is a collaboration between China and France, which will conduct gamma-ray astronomy dedicated to the most distant explosions of stars, the gamma-ray bursts. Boeing's Starliner is unfortunately facing further delays aboard the ISS. It was planned to have returned to Earth by now, but technical issues remain unsolved, and so teams need it to spend a bit longer docked to the station to perform more checkouts and tests. I guess I don't really have much more to add. None of us can tell with absolute certainty what's going on with the spacecraft, given that NASA themselves are still trying to analyze things. I do not expect a rescue Dragon will be necessary though. Starliner has already made 2 safe Earth re-entries prior to this flight, and NASA have managed to successfully test fire the vehicle's thrusters, but yeah, it's disappointing that we're still not seeing Starliner work without issue. Will another test flight be required because of this, or will it be deemed close enough and enter operational service after this mission? Time will tell, I suppose. Lowne Aerospace had another busy week last week. Our modded colonization series continued with the addition of Natea's Stalker-like station parts that we used to build a big multi-launch orbiting colony above Minmus. It was a big old mission with lots of twists, turns, and blunders, so if it sounds like a good time, then it should now be one of the clickable cards on screen. There's also another video from my channel there, as well as the names of my Patreon and YouTube channel supporters. If you want to support Space this week, then do consider signing up to either of those. I always really do appreciate it. But other than that, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one, which will be Kerbal Space Program. That's the end of the video.